Michael already mentioned that we are going to swap to English to this panel. You can, of course, ask your questions in German, and we will translate your questions later on. My name is Anna Löbert. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the WZB, and I'm part of the team that has organized this conference today. And I'll be the moderator for this panel. In this session, we want to look at pathways out of education inequality through international perspectives on early childhood education and care. The idea of this is, of course, to learn from different institutional perspectives, policy approaches, and empirical evidence, and to reflect on what that might mean for the German context. As a social scientist myself, who studies the intersection of law and politics, I really like these comparative perspectives because they allow us to think through familiar problems from a new angle. So I'm really pleased that we have today two international experts with us who will speak on this, looking at a very different institutional perspective on this. So the format of this panel is straightforward. It's quite similar to the first one. We will have two presentations, and I will then immediately open for discussion with all of you. So please take a note of any thoughts and any ideas that you have while you're listening to our presentations today. Our first speaker today is Dr. Nima Sharmad, who's sitting next to me. She's a senior researcher at the VBJK, which is the Center for Innovation in the Early Years in Ghent in Belgium. Her work focuses on early childhood education and care with a particular attention to professional development, inclusion, family participation, and pedagogical practice. Nima has been involved in several international and European research projects, including the NESIT study on quality frameworks in early childhood education and care, and she's collaborated with several universities such as the University of Liège and the University of Florence. Today, Nima will be speaking to us about insights on access and social inclusion in early childhood education and care from a comparative European perspective. Nima, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, the floor is yours.
So, do I have to?
It's already turned on.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation and for the nice introduction. I indeed work in Belgium, but actually I'm from Italy and from some other countries. but let's say that I worked for a long time in Italy. So maybe my insight will also bring something from there. So what we do at VBJK in Belgium is indeed trying to always link research, policy and practice when we talk about ECC. And one of the things we did in the last years was collaborating in a report for the NESIT network, which provides reports for the European Commission. And with the idea of also here linking what we found on the policy level to practice and research. I will base my presentation on this and then bring some insights also from other projects. And of course, when you have questions or whatever clarifications, you can always ask. I'm very sorry that I don't speak German, which also means that I didn't understand what you said in the first part of the conference. I had some very small translations from my very nice lady that was sitting next to me, but if I repeat some things, I'm sorry. I did understand that there were some interesting discussions that I think I will bring also in my presentation. So I'll try to do my best. So what did we do in this report, but also actually in our whole work when we work around ECC? We always take into account the European Quality Framework for ECC. Which is from, let's say, 2014, but then 2019 was officialized, let's say. And in the European Quality Framework, I don't know if you know it, but there are 5 areas that are taken into account to define quality in a European framework. Access, staff, evaluation and monitoring, governance and funding, and curriculum. In the report that we wrote, we tried to see all these 5 areas, how are they implemented in policy in the different European countries. So what we do, we always take into account, like you also said, the 3 functions of ECC, the economic, social, and pedagogical function, we like to repeat it, even though it sounds obvious, but the center of this framework is the well-being and learning of children and their families. And I also like to underline, I think this might be connected with what some of your questions this morning. I also like to underline that we focus on the here and now, which doesn't mean that ECC also doesn't prepare for the future, but sometimes the discussion of preparation for the future becomes too prominent, and we forget that we are actually talking about children who has to have their well-being here and now. We will see later also what does it mean, this discussion in terms of practice, but for example, I think you were talking about school readiness. There is indeed a tendency to see young children already as academic learners, and we forget sometimes that they are actually children. So that they are, we tend to say they are the citizens of tomorrow. We like to say they are the citizens of today. They are already citizens, and ECC is a place that creates already a small society, a small democratic society for the here and now. The risk of seeing just the future is that indeed then ECC becomes, into brackets, just a preparation for. So childcare has to prepare for kindergarten, kindergarten has to prepare for primary school for, and we lose a little bit the contact with the actual well-being of the children, because this brings a lot of pressure on the shoulders of the professionals first. But the projection is then the pressure on the shoulders of the families and on the children. In Belgium, we have a very interesting example, if you want, of this pressure. There's a very concrete one. We have a split system in Belgium, so it means that the 0 to 3 and the 3 to 6 is not integrated, which brings a lot of problems. One of the very practical problems, for example, is that, well, first of all, I said 0 to 3, but in Belgium is 0 to 2.5. So that's already. So 2.5 children go to school, which is quite soon, and they go to kindergarten. This means, for example, that in kindergarten they expect the children to be potty trained. So of course this is a systemic problem, institutional problem, but what happens is that the professionals feel the pressure, and this pressure is thrown on the shoulders of parents and children. So they say, yeah, you actually have to be potty trained. This brings, it's a very small example, but it gives, I think, an idea of what it means, what kind of problems a schoolification approach can bring in the early years. So this said, what did we do in this report is, as I said, providing an overview of the state of play, reforms, challenges on the policy level in the European countries. We analyzed all the 5 areas that I showed, but we had a specific attention on accessibility and staff. So now today I will focus on access, on accessibility, because this is the theme of your conference. We did desk research on the one hand, and also interviews with key experts from different countries. Of course, the whole report and also everything we talk about is very much influenced by the type of system that we have in the different countries. As you know, there are different degrees of integration in European countries. This brings a lot of consequences on many levels. Opportunities for in-service training, initial qualifications, the pedagogical framework, the curriculum, everything actually, is related to, are we working in an integrated system 0 to 6, or are we working in a split system where 0 to 3 and 3 to 6 are depending on different ministries. So they have different policy regulations, but this means that they have different everything. And in the last, while before in the previous reports, there was a kind of dichotomic difference between split and integrated system. Now, in the last years, we tend to have a more nuanced view, because we say that some countries have a little bit of an integrated system, but not completely. I have in my mind the example of Italy, because I come from there. Italy changed the system from split to integrated in 2015, so 10 years ago. So on paper it is now integrated, but it doesn't mean it's integrated in practice. It's very difficult. You also know it, you have an integrated system, but there are differences. So, but that's to say that this influences, of course, everything we are going to say. When we talk about access and inclusion, what we find in the European Quality Framework is that access to quality ECC services for all children contributes to their healthy development and educational success, helps in reducing social inequalities, and narrows the competence gap between children with different socioeconomic backgrounds. Now, I'm not going to read it all, but what we want to say is that so access is really taken as one of the key elements of quality ECC, also in the European Quality Framework. Now, what does this mean? It means, you said it also this morning, I think, that we have to invest in quantity, but that's not enough. We have to also invest in quality. What happens now in the European countries is that most European member states address actually access. So there is kind of awareness, but how is it addressed? They address it with providing extra places, sometimes with compensating fundings. It means funding mechanism. It means that the private sector might take a bigger role, and this can have different consequences. So if there is a system where there is collaboration, understanding, common framework, this can be an interesting option, but often the increasing of a private sector without a common framework, without, for example, pedagogical coaches that take care of the quality of all the ECC centers, this can lead to less quality. There is also a tendency in guaranteeing extra places as a right. Here you have legal entitlement. And this helps in reducing the so-called ECC gap. I'm going to explain later what it is, the ECC gap. So there are efforts, but the efforts do not always address quality and equity. One emblematic example is the priority lists, where in the countries where we have waiting lists to access ECC, there are priority criteria, and for example, in Belgium, also in Hungary, but in Belgium, they proposed a priority criteria related just to the working conditions of the parents, meaning parents who work have access. There was a big protest against this rule, exactly because it hinders social inclusion. So now they decided not to apply this rule. That is an interesting thing that happened. And to go back to actually the previous rule, which was giving a percentage of places to families with disadvantaged background. So, yeah, that's to say, when you create extra places, you also have to see how to make it, how to create equality and quality. There is another big problem, which is in a way contradictory with the idea of creating extra places, which is there is in almost all European countries a very big staff shortage related to different issues. One is the working conditions, but also the social perception of this profession, which in many countries is not valued socially, so it doesn't bring people to choose for this profession. And this staff shortage is, of course, in contradiction with the idea that also emerges at European level to make this profession more, make this sector more professional and bring quality in the professionalization of the staff. So these things are, of course, contradictory. Here you see that there is indeed an increasement in the enrollment rates in general. If you see, it compares 2013-2021. In Germany, there is actually a little bit of a decrease. But overall, the red line is the Barcelona target, which set a minimum of 45% enrollment rate before 2030 in the 0 to 3 sector, and 95 or 96 for the 3 to 6. Many countries for the 3 to 6 actually reach or almost reach the target. For 0 to 3, it's another story. So actually what we see is that there is an increasement in the enrollment rates, but first of all, this doesn't say anything about quality. Sometimes there are not clear data in different countries about what does it mean for vulnerable children. There is a lower enrollment rate anyhow for the 0 to 3 sector. And anyhow a shortage of ECC places. And like you said also this morning, this is an average, but within this average there is less attendance, less enrollment of children from families with vulnerable background in ECC. They calculate, if I'm not mistaken, more or less for the 0 to 3, 15% less in general, and for the 3 to 6, 11% less. So this means that, as also Michel van den Broek and Ariana Lazzari used to say in their report, that there is a paradox where we all recognize that quality ECC has a very important impact on the well-being of children, especially the children from families with vulnerable background. On the other hand, the paradox is that these are exactly the children that are not in ECC like the others, or when they are in ECC of less quality. So this is the big gap that we have to address. Sorry. So, and there is here, as I was saying, a link to what we call the ECC gap, which some countries decided to, like you also I think addressed this morning, to address with, for example, compulsory ECC. But I think it was also the discussion this morning, and we also at VBJK, we are also very, we are a bit critical, let's say, in the sense that there is a difference, of course, between legal entitlement, so having a right, and making that right an obligation. And the problem of the compulsory attendance is that there is a risk also there in exactly excluding even more the vulnerable groups, because it's an obligation and it's not something that comes from informing, dialoguing. So it's again a kind of measure that can have unexpected consequences. And it should anyhow, if it happens, it should be embedded in a holistic approach to ECC, which we call educare, so education and care together. Very often now, actually, education and care are kind of split, especially in the countries that have a split ECC system. But in general, when we have this tendency to schoolification, we tend also to divide education and care as if these are two different things. They are actually together. Learning, playing, and caring, they are linked to each other. And when we address also legal entitlement, this should be the basis of the curriculum. Then working in small groups, relationship with parents, these are all elements that when they are lacking and you go for compulsory education, this can actually bring to exclusion. Another very important theme is to create access is affordability, like you also, I think, said this morning. And what is happening at European level around affordability? Different things. So there is an agreement, of course, that ECC should be affordable, but then how and what and when, these are the questions. Some countries now prioritize the oldest children, so from 3 on, for example, and there they say now it's free, but actually the 0 to 3 not. In some countries, for example, Spain decided recently to make the whole range, the 0 to 6, free of charge. Some other measures are, like I said before, in Belgium, for example, they focus on the affordability for families with vulnerable background. So a more target approach in a vision of progressive universalism where we aim at free childcare for everybody, but we start with a targeted approach. Some countries have introduced reforms gradually. For example, Portugal, who made ECC free of charge for children from 0 to 2 years old. Starting with the children born in September 2021. So this is also a way of doing it. Then another option is providing a certain amount of free hours, for example. That's what's happening in Luxembourg. From 2017, children from 1 to 4 have 20 hours of free childcare. And some countries, instead of making ECC free, they address some specific barriers. For example, in Lithuania, they say they provide budget for expenses such as transport, meal, materials. So this is just to say that there are several ways of addressing in different ways affordability with the idea we have to do something, but not always it's that easy. Where to invest? So we think that we need a progressive universalism approach, like I said before. So we want good quality and free ECC for everybody, but where do we start? We can start with paying specific attention to the groups that actually that need more quality ECC and that have more difficulties. So specific attention to the families with vulnerable background and outreach approach, not only expecting them to come to us, but going to. Working in an integrated way, that's also a very important thing, so that ECC is not an isolated thing, but there has to be relationship with the other services. And educare pedagogy, like I was saying, a holistic approach. And more investment in comprehensibility. If you see these areas there, this comes from a report of Ariana Lazzari of 2018. These are elements that should be taken into account when talking about inclusion in ECC. So affordability, availability, accessibility, utility, and comprehensibility. What she says in her report is that efforts in the last years have been made, especially in affordability, availability, and accessibility, which means that we want more services available, more quantity, let's say. They have to be affordable. And accessibility is more related here to the barriers that we can encounter to access to ECC. For example, we want multilingual ECC, the bureaucratic barriers, and so forth. So these are areas that are already problematic, but at least they are addressed. But comprehensibility and utility are a bit more difficult, and she says in her report that's actually where we also should pay attention. What does it mean? So ECC has to be useful. For who? For the families. So what does it mean in practice? For example, why are the families with vulnerable background not coming to our ECC? What are the barriers? We have to ask them. Is there a timetable that is not okay? Is it the price? Is it the language? And then we have to make it useful. But we also have to make it comprehensible. It means that we cannot just bring our idea of education and say that's it, but we have to put our idea in dialogue with the one of the parents and with the needs of the children. And this is sometimes more difficult, especially in the discussion about obligation. We want children and parents we want to oblige them to go to ECC because we know that ECC is good. But what do they think? What is their framework? It's not something that we often ask. What is your experience? And this comprehensibility is something when we talk about raising the enrollment rates and also raising the demand of ECC, we have to create the desire to be in ECC. And to create it, we have to be in dialogue with the families. Okay, I will quickly I will end with a small example. This is because maybe it makes it more vivid. This is an example of an ECC center in Italy, which some years ago invested in some elements that actually give you an idea of what it means investing in the social, pedagogical, and economic dimension of ECC. What does it mean to address these 5 areas? There was no ECC center, but we are in an area of Florence where there was a big percentage of families with Chinese background. And these families, they didn't bring their children to the ECC centers of the municipality of Florence. So the municipality asks the questions like, why they don't come? And then, in collaboration with an organization that worked on inclusion, they decide to open a new center that will focus on this question. They go and do a little research with the families that are working there in that area, and they ask why you don't come to the ECC centers. The answers can be grouped in these 4 categories. They say the timetable is too strict. We don't manage to bring our kids at 9 o'clock because we wait, because we work until late. They go to bed late. We don't go. Difficult administrative procedure because they had to inscribe at the municipality papers, difficult. Costs, and then lack of trust, because there is a fear that my child will be excluded, he doesn't speak the language, different habits. So the municipality of Florence, together with this organization, they decided to invest on these things. And they created an ECC center with flexible timing, different timetable to come in and out. Direct inscription at the ECC center. No papers, nothing. They started with free childcare center for that target population. They had a cultural, linguistic cultural mediator, Chinese. They pointed on diverse stuff, so in terms of gender, socioeconomic and cultural background, languages. They had a specific intense training for that stuff that was starting there on inclusion. And next to the center, they also opened a linguistic center for older children and adults, linguistic in Chinese and Italian, so you could also learn Chinese there. And a network with other organizations. And in this way, in 2 years' time, in this ECC center, there was more than 40% of the kids from Chinese origin. So this is just to say that this is a small example, of course, it's not a change on policy level, but sometimes you can start small to then bring some changes also at the policy level. And it means working towards a competence system, because what comes out from our report, but also from our report, other reports, is that you can never work on one element of quality. So now we are focused on accessibility, but actually you cannot work just on accessibility. You have to work on governance, on monitoring, on curriculum all together, because it's not possible to make a fragmentation of these elements. Voila, I see that the time is finished. I just want to say, if you want more information, at the end of this report there are specific policy recommendations, and here you can find the report.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting to see both the breadth of the European Union and then this very specific example that you brought with you today. So thank you for that. We're now going to swap to our online speaker, and I hope that our transition will run smoothly. While we wait for the Zoom call to be put up on the screen, I want to introduce to you Dr. Nina Drange, who will be speaking remotely. Nina is a senior researcher at the Frisch Center in Norway and holds a PhD in economics. Her research focuses on the economics of education, with a particular emphasis on early childhood education and care, as you might have guessed. So her focus is really on child development on the one hand, and on social mobility and sort of the measure of these kind of issues. In her presentation, Nina will draw on evidence from the Nordic context to discuss how early and universal access to early childhood education and care relates to educational inequalities and long-term outcomes. Nina, I hope you can hear us. I hope you're following, and the floor is yours. Could you please also share your slides?
Yes, I can, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, you can hear you fine.
That's very good. Okay, so then we'll see. Here we are. Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me. It feels a bit weird to be sitting here in our meeting room and being in a conference in Germany, but that was just how it had to be this time. Okay, so very, very happy to be invited and to share some perspectives from the Nordic setting. I will have to say just up front that, I mean, most of the evidence I'm going to show you will be from Norway, because that's where I have been doing my research, and I know better the Norwegian setting, but there will also be some evidence from Sweden. And I think it's fair to say that the Nordic countries have a very similar ECC policy. So what I'm going to say here will be kind of to some extent similar to what would be the case if I had all the countries in my presentation. So I'm going to try to kind of, my perspective here will be some focus on the educational inequality, but I will also, and how kind of the ECC in Norway try to address that, and have to some extent succeeded, and what our challenges are. So I can, oops, no, actually my, okay, something didn't work here, sorry about that. I can't now, you can only see the first. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so for Norway, most children will enroll when they are between 1 and 2 years old. So we don't really have like a meaningful measure for 0 to 2 because parental leave in Norway is about 1 year. So most kids will be at home with one of their parents during their first year. We have, and I'm going to come back to these things. So we have regulations governing structural quality, teachers and adults per children and group size. We have a very low parental co-payment at this point. It has decreased a lot over the years. So from August this year, it's kept at 100 euros per month, which I guess even, which is, I guess, heavily subsidized for most meaningful settings. And there are further subsidies for low-income families. We do have this policy where where low-income families can have a part-time daycare slot for free. So this is the coverage over years. I think it's kind of nice to show how it has developed. So early on here, we started in 1980. This was about when I enrolled in childcare. And then it was not really high share, about 30% of the older kids. So the blue here shows 1 to 5 year olds, so like the overall enrollment for all kids between 1 and 5. And the pink one is for the older kids, whereas the 1 to 2 year olds are the green one. And this was very, very low up until this here indicates an agreement in 2003 where there was this policy agreement where big major parties decided that we're gonna really throw a lot of money on this. We want to have everybody who wants to have a childcare slot should have one. And so they basically expanded a lot over these years here. It also expanded before, right? But here we had the biggest expansion for the younger kids. So today, about 80% of the 1 to 2 year olds are enrolled, and almost all 3 to 5 year olds will be enrolled. And because our system is like we have both public and private centers, but they will all receive subsidies, and they will also all be subject to this maximum of 100. They can only charge parents 100 euros, although they will then get like subsidies from the state on top of that, of course, quite substantial subsidies. So I'm going to talk a bit about the structural quality regulation, so you get like a sense of what childcare is in Norway. I'm going to also talk a bit later on about like the content, but that is going to be quite brief, and it's not like my specialty, but I do understand and appreciate that it's kind of important to, when we are talking about effects of something, then what are the effects from, right? It's kind of important to also have that in mind. So we have the structural quality is mostly related to how many adults there should be in the center or in a group. So we have usually, it would be 1 teacher per group. That would require a bachelor degree education. So it's 3 to 4 years at the college. And then they will work with 2 assistants. So the staff to child ratio should be 1 to 3 under the age of 3 and 1 to 6 for older kids. And the group will then typically consist of 10 children for the younger ones with 2 assistants and 1 teacher, and then 16 to 18 children for the older kids with 2 assistants and 1 teacher. So these groups will typically, many centers will be integrated, so they will have both types of groups, but they will be separated in the sense that you will have like younger kids, because of this type of ratio thing, that you will have to have some, the young kids are with some adults in one group, and then there are others in bigger groups for the older children. But mostly these centers are integrated, so you will have both types of groups, and the kid can kind of go there over, like from 1 to they start school at 6, but just transition from one group to the other at some point. There are some regulations on space per child. Indoor should be 5 square meters and outdoor 30 square meters. This varies a lot, I have to say, and the same is the case with the staff. So it's not like all centers will have the right amount of staff, especially when it comes to the education of the teacher. They can have these exemptions. They can apply for exemptions, and then they will have to, or they will be able to still, even though they can't fulfill this, they will be able to function. But this is kind of the goal, and it's, yeah, I guess they do monitor it, but we have been looking into this. I'm not going to show that here today, but we do find some variation when we look at different centers on how well they are able to recruit. So then we have this for the content. We have this framework plan. It's like a national curriculum for childcare centers. I should say that this is not a curriculum in the sense that you would maybe think a curriculum would look like, but so it's very informal, but it's there. It's designed to be used daily. It states values, purpose, and content, but not a very concrete content, basically. There is also support material at the Directorate for Education, but it is formal, but with quite very few strict demands as to what would happen during a day. So it's not like a day-to-day thing. It's more like values, and I think that child-led education is very prevalent in this national curriculum. So the children should themselves kind of come up with stuff. I remember my kids, when they were in childcare, we would have this, there was this really, really nice and very competent pedagogical leader. But then so at one point they were like, well, now the kids are very interested in sticks. So we're going to have this, it's going to be a topic. Sticks are a topic, right? And then they did lots of things with sticks. I don't know. It's like, this is kind of a bit how it works. So I think the ECEC philosophy in Norway, and I think this is true for the other Nordic countries as well. This we have got from the framework plan. So values should be communicated and practiced throughout educational work. So the center's educational work, there's a lot of values here. Childhood is inherently valuable. There is a holistic approach to development, which is essential. And then the center should collaborate with families to meet children's need for care, play, and learning. They are interconnected and should be viewed as such. So I think that, to kind of sum it up, I think learning through play is a key factor in the Norwegian Childcare Center and the Norwegian philosophy. And so this is kind of, now I'm going to talk more about like how, because this is what I have been doing research on, how does these centers and how does kind of these huge expansions of childcare in Norway, which is really what I'm going to look at, how has this affected child outcomes? And there are several studies. I should say that I'm going to focus here on the studies that they are quantitative, most of these studies, and it's and they try to, in some way or the other, take into account that, like, studying how childcare affects a child is kind of difficult in like it's difficult in the sense that, like, children that actually attend childcare will probably be different from children who do not attend childcare. So it's not really like, you can't really just compare a child who enters childcare with a child that doesn't enter childcare. Like, most likely the kids that are in childcare might have parents that are kind of more interested in education perhaps, or less, or I mean, it could be many things, but basically they're not necessarily the same. So what we are trying to do in this study and in most of the other studies I'm gonna talk about is to try to get at what is the effect of actually going to childcare and not kind of the effect of having parents that are interested in childcare, if you understand. Yeah. This is kind of, maybe it's a bit technical, but I need to say it now, and then I'm not going to talk a lot about it afterwards. So here we use, this is based on this big increase that I showed you when kids were starting to enroll in childcare early. So these are for age 1 to 2. And in Oslo at that point, we actually had a lottery assignment of slots. So that's really nice for people who are interested in finding effects of stuff, because then you can actually compare those who, all these kids that actually wanted, or these families wanted a childcare slot, but there was still not enough slots. So they then basically randomly assigned slots. And so when we look at this, we do find that an offer of public childcare early on causes improvement in language and improvement in mathematics in the first year of school. So these are early tests taken at so some kind of school readiness. They're already in school, but they've only been for a couple of months. And the effects were quite substantial. So they compared to the achievement of different groups on the tests of about, so they're closing about 90% of the gender gap in performance. And between about a third of the performance gap between children of low and high educated parents. So this was basically just the effect of getting a slot randomly early on. We do find, which I think in this setting is interesting, that effects are stronger for children from low income and low educated families. And thus this contributes to closing the achievement gap in the early school years. So this is for the early years. This study is not mine. This is one of my co-authors who's working at the university. He's a development psychologist, and they have been looking at the same. They didn't use a lottery, but that they had they used information about this huge rollout of childcare from 2003 until 2008, and so they also look at early childcare. And they find that indeed starting early also affected 5th grade test scores. So this is math test score. And interestingly here, what we see here is that, so these are something called instrumental variables estimates. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but let's just say that these are effects of starting childcare. And what you see here is that, so these are the ones not starting and these start. But you see, for those with 9 years of education, this really makes a difference to start early in childcare. Whereas for those with parents that do have a lot of education, it doesn't really matter. So these basically overlap. These also overlap. So it's only we only find effects for those with parents with low parental education, which I think also speaks to the social mobility part here. Then I'm going to talk a bit about for the older kids, and then because in Norway, since we've had this for a long time, quite a high coverage of childcare for those kids, we go back in time. So this study it's not mine, it's from some colleagues, and they have looked at the expansion during the late 70s, early 80s. So this expansion. And what is nice with that is that they can look at outcomes in the long run. So not only school outcomes in 5th grade, but they can actually look at whether or not they finish high school and whether they go to college. And actually now they're working on a new paper where they look at long-term outcomes. So that's kind of nice. And they find evidence of higher earnings among those that, what they do actually, just to say that quickly, is that they, here this figure shows that there are some municipalities that expands a lot. So this is also an expansion story. So they get money. At some point, they decided we need more childcare slots. We're going to give municipalities money to expand. And so some of these municipalities expands a lot and some does not. And so what they do is that they compare children in these types of municipalities over time. And then what they find there is that those where there was a large expansion over time, they find that there is a higher likelihood of finishing high school and enrolling in college. And again, results are driven by children of mothers without a high school degree. So it's it indicates here that they are this is also kind of contributing to social mobility. And they have this nice thing in their paper where they say that in aggregate terms, the authors estimate that the additional 17,500 childcare slots produced about 6,200 years of education. I kind of thought that was kind of neat to see. And then again, the heterogeneity here suggests increased social mobility. So these are for the older kids. And then we have had a policy in Norway that I think is also interesting for other countries, that we've had these policies related to integration through the childcare center. So basically various policies where we have had part-time slots for free. And these are not directly kind of, I mean, everybody in these city districts will actually get this, so they will get free childcare for a part-time slot. But it's kind of directed towards city districts with a high share of children with an immigrant background. So these are kind of the reason why this policy came in place. And it was also because there is quite a large discrepancy between the share of children without an immigrant background in childcare and those with an immigrant background. It has, I should say, become less pronounced over time. So anyway, so this policy, then they were offered the opportunities to send their 5-year-old for 4 hours a day without paying. And then it was introduced and expanded in 2007 for children aged 4 and 5. And so it has, and also from 2015, it has become a national policy that families earning below certain thresholds qualifies for a part-time free slot for their 4 and 5-year-old. And today it's actually from 3-year-old. So that's today's policy. But we have been looking at these first introductions of policies, and then what we find here for Oslo show that free part-time childcare actually did contribute to an increased enrollment in ECEC for the group of immigrant children, which I mean was the first thing we were interested in. Does it actually help? It should be said that it was not only that it was free, it was also related to, like the previous speaker, that they did work quite actively with the families. There would be typically like some people would go and talk to families in their homes, talking about childcare. What is childcare? How do we what do we do there? And trying to kind of motivate families to send their children. We have also looked at cognitive development here, and we do find that the children that got access to this policy, they do perform better on tests later on in school. And the same is true actually when they're 10, although this is actually not the published finding. And we again find evidence that it's these children in low-income families and where the mother does not work who do better on the tests. So this is kind of where the action is. Just quickly, some evidence from Sweden, and this is on health, because I think that there are many, especially when it comes to mental health. I think this is kind of the truth is still out there, and whether or not, at least this is a policy discussion in Norway now. Maybe starting childcare beneficial to cognitive skills, among them health outcomes. But actually, the Swedish study, they do find a reduction in mental disorders in the medium run for children affected by the reform. So this is also a rollout of childcare. And they find everybody who has had a kid in childcare will not be surprised by this, like immediate increase in probabilities of diagnosis with physical health conditions, typically like the flu and like small infections, but will fade as children get older. So basically they will be more sick when they start, which I guess is not so surprising. Just short on non-cognitive skills. after all, child development is not just about test scores, and there has been a general worry that the early childcare may be harmful for non-cognitive outcomes. We don't find any evidence for this in quite strong research science. The age of entry, this child psychologist has been looking into that. They don't find any effect on behavioral problems through age 8, and no effect on parenting behavior. And then also no effect on behavioral problems from hours in ECEC per week. So when they take into account selection into childcare centers. So that's reassuring. I'm not sure how much time I have now, but I was thinking...
I was going to suggest that maybe you can wrap up so we have some time for discussion. So it's great that you're asking about this.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to do that. I'm just quickly going to mention this... there was this recent RCT where they look at, because as I said, the structural content in Norway is quite unstructured. So what this study did was actually they had this really nice structured learning program for 5-year-olds. I'm sure this happens in many countries already, so this is kind of maybe only interesting for us, but they actually do find that this more structured learning program from the oldest kids actually also led to increased math skills, in fact, later on in school. Anyway, so I'm going to wrap up. I was just going to say quickly that there is lower use in certain groups still, and I was part of this commission a couple of years ago who came with this Childhood for Life, this government report, where we kind of try to say that what the challenges are is we should kind of everybody should be able to have a childcare slot when they want it. We're not saying that it shouldn't be kind of compulsory, but it should be possible, and there shouldn't be too much of a bureaucracy around it. So that was kind of the main thing. Okay, so the highlights, I'm not sure whether I need to, maybe it's more interesting with the discussion, but it seems at least that in the Norwegian setting, evidence suggests that ECEC improves social mobility, so that's a good thing. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Nina, for also another interesting presentation on another very interesting case study. I know that in Germany, a lot of people tend to look towards the Nordic countries when they look for a place where things at least sometimes seem to work a little bit better. So without much further ado, as we don't have much time anymore, and I know we're all kind of getting maybe a little bit hungry, I would suggest that I collect a few questions, maybe 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then we can see how much questions we can gather before our break. And I would suggest that you keep your questions short in the interest of giving everybody who has a question an opportunity to ask it. So if you want to know anything, I see a question back there at the end of the room.
Should I talk to you or does she hear me?
Yeah, so our Zoom speaker can hear and she can
great.
see you. She can also see the room. So
I'm Juliane Gestolat. I'm from Little Scientists House Foundation. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, what's the information policy? Like, how do you reach out to families with an immigration background? Or is it mandatory for them to enroll in ECEC?
there's another question here in the front.
Antonia Scholz from Deutschen Jugendinstitut, German Youth Institute. Thank you both to you for your very interesting thoughts and insights. I was wondering, referring to the Norwegian example, Nina, you just mentioned on your last slide that you are thinking about it could be an approach that applications are not needed for ECEC, and I was wondering, there was not much time left, but I was wondering, could you maybe elaborate on this? How would that work if there is no application needed? How would, in everyday life in the preschool, how would that work if parents do not have to apply for preschool? Thank you.
Thank you. Since I don't see any hands, I would suggest that we give our speakers a chance to respond.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first, Nima?
Questions are for Nina or?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to respond, feel free to say something.
Okay. Well, the last question I was thinking. Also, in the small example from Florence that I gave, there were no application indeed, and the idea was that parents would just go to the childcare center itself and inscribe. So, of course, this might sound a little bit weird, but it did work. In that case, it eliminated a lot of barriers. So I don't know how this could, maybe Nina can answer how this can be brought to on a bigger scale, because this was an individual childcare center. But I do think that addressing the bureaucratic part is indeed something that has to be done if we want to make access, to increase access of families with a vulnerable background. So, yeah.
Nina, do you want to say something to these questions?
Yes, I can say that, well, as far as the information policy went, what they did here in Oslo, where they have this quite focused project to recruit immigrant children, they would typically, so they would have, for instance, they would have what you'd say in English, like stands in the shopping mall, and like basically the city district where the childcare centers are, kind of, that's the level of the childcare centers. They would be just present where people were present and where people were shopping and they would kind of answer questions and try to approach them. But they did, in fact, also go from door to door, especially the first years, to try to, because then they got basically lists from the government where they said these are in childcare and these are not in childcare, and then they basically went on the door to people who would. So it was kind of, that's costly, right? So it's probably not workable and in a big scale, but this information policy was quite active. When it comes to this application not needed, I think what is, it's not still policy, but this was what we recommended, and I think, at least in Norway, I think it would be possible in the sense that we do have registers, so we would just basically allocate children to a childcare center in the municipality, and then they would just get this offer, and then they would have to say, of course, yes and no, but then at least there would be something there. So I think that would be the way we would think about it. But I mean, the problem is that today people in Norway, they want kids to start when they're 1, but it's not still actually always possible. So I guess we would still need to kind of get our coverage of childcare for the youngest more up to date. But I guess that is the way we look at it. And there is also this important thing when it comes to payment that has been discussed in the Norwegian setting, and they've tried to do this again in the municipality of Oslo, where because it's free, right, for some families, but they have to document that they are not earning that too much. And so this thing was that what they did was that they experimented with actually doing this automatically. So they have to sign something the first time they enroll their kid, but after that they can check income from last year automatically, and then they don't have to do like their bureaucracy around it afterwards, which I think has been very successful, because this is often a problem, and also some families end up paying a lot when they shouldn't pay, because basically and then they get debt, and there is many problems. So yeah, I think that is also important.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from our audience? Yes, there's a question right in front.
Yeah, thank you very much for bringing the European perspective to this workshop. So I have a question regarding regulation, and it's for Nina Drange. I just wonder, you mentioned that you have national regulation, especially on the structural equality issues. You mentioned a staff-child ratio and a national curriculum. And we learned this morning that it's also important to look at the process quality of early childhood education. And I wonder if there's anything, any regulation, national regulation on that, like a quality monitoring that's compulsory for each facility or anything. Yeah, would be interesting to learn about that. Thank you.
Yeah, should I answer that? I think for Norway at least we don't really have that. We only have like the structural things, which is easy to count, right? But it's very difficult, I think, to monitor a structural process quality. It's because you would really put a lot of resources in it. It's super important, but we don't have a good way of doing that. So I think that is a challenge for the Norwegian system. And I should say that we do have this, there is this survey going to parents where they can, every year there's a survey going to all parents whether or not they're happy. And most of them are quite happy. So I think that is a good thing. But of course, they are not necessarily experts on child development, right? So it might also be, they would probably pick up if the process quality was horrendous. But I think that it also varies a lot across centers. And I think that is a real problem. So I think that's a challenge for us as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, the two of you, for your presentations. Nima, I have a question. You mentioned with the Florence example that one of the reasons of the Chinese parents for not bringing their kids to the early centers was that there was a lack of trust in the mainstream education, and that they had the fear of exclusion, of experiences of exclusion in the center. Nina, you said integration through early childhood education, but it can be that there is exclusion while children are there. So if this is a reason for many parents, and we have diverse parents now, then this diversity issue and equity issue should be central in this curriculum. And my question is, what did your research show? How was this implemented in that curricula, in that countries where you had a look at? Because that seems to me essential.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It is indeed an essential element, and I think it's also a complex element when it goes about trust. So in the curricula that we saw, I have to say that generally the issue the area of inclusion, diversity is addressed, meaning that there is a kind of awareness that we should do something about it. But whether it's then clearly implemented, that's another thing, and it depends on several things. So it is related to how are the people trained, the initial training, the content, because we often talk about the level of the initial qualification, but in some countries where the level might be high or bachelor, or it doesn't mean that the contents of the initial qualification is aligned with the European Quality Framework, the theme of inclusion and diversity, educare. Then there is, so the professionalization of staff on the floor, they have to be, that's why I was saying in the center in Florence, they invested in an intensive training on the floor before starting. This was very important to give to the staff the competences to deal with that trust that you were mentioning. Because how do you address trust? Yeah. Difficult question, but you have to first of all start with the idea that you don't have to demand it. It's normal that there is no trust. That's already, instead of saying you should trust me, the beginning should be, I understand that you don't trust me. And then from there, you create a dialogue. So, but this is a relational competence and a reflective competence that you get through training. So, through coaching. In Italy, the role of a pedagogical coach, maybe also I think in Norway, but this not only training but accompanying the stuff in reflecting on practice is very important, and it happens daily. So there is a question, you come with a group and you reflect on that question, and that's very important because in ECC you don't have standard answers or solutions, you always have to reflect on what is actually happening. So there it is, I want to say the team is present in the curricula, but how it is implemented, it depends very much on how the services are organized. And I can give the example of Italy, where the pedagogical coaches are present in, not in the whole Italy, because also Italy is also a special case, but in certain regions the quality is more recognized, and these are the regions where this accompanying stuff daily and reflecting on practice is crucial. And then I would say the informal moments with the families are very important to create this trust. So not just the standard meeting moments, but really the moment where the parents bring the child, when they pick up the child. These are the moments where you create that trust. And before the inscription, you have to invest in the outreaching approach. So also going to the families. This is also, for example, to give a small example, in Belgium they tried the mobile ECC center, so that's a kind of caravan that goes in different areas where there are families with vulnerable background, and there they offer activities instead of asking to come to us. That's a beginning to then create a bridge to the ECC centers. So yeah, it's a very important question, difficult to answer in a straight way, but I would say that the competences of the ECC staff are crucial, together with some specific measures related to outreachment, progressive universalism, and so on. And of course, an educare approach, holistic approach at the basis, because indeed the caring issue, so that the question about will my child be excluded is related to a worry on the care aspect of ECC, which belongs to the families, and we have to address that.
I see we have one last question in front, and I would suggest that this is a brief question. And
Thank you. It's again on this issue of trust. Do you have, perhaps both of you, have experiences or looked at approaches to bring the diversity into the ECEC teams? So in your example, for example, to have Chinese educators and to promote the diversity.
In the ECC center in Florence that I was mentioning, it was indeed Chinese educators, but not just Chinese. It was diversity in general, so there was also someone from Portugal, and it was also diversity in terms of multilingual diversity and gender. But in that childcare center, they managed to do that because there was really an investment also from the municipality. It is not an easy thing to do in a landscape where there is shortage of staff, because of course these two things, of course you want quality staff, you want competent staff, you want diverse staff, but there is no staff. That's a problem. So it's a very important issue, but again a big challenge at the moment. I think it is related, like I was saying, that you have to invest in all the areas in order to have a competent system. You have to also invest primarily in creating good working conditions, transforming the social image also of this profession, to then structurally can think about a diversity of staff, because now it's a bit of a challenge. Maybe a small thing is that the role of assistants, the assistants that assist the core professional, here can be important, because assistants often have diverse socio-cultural background more than the core professionals. So it is very important to involve assistants, but in our report we see that assistants are actually a forgotten group very often in policy documents, but they have a big potential in becoming that link with exactly with the vulnerable families that we're missing, but they are often not involved in service trainings, in the professionalization together with the core professionals. So this is an important issue to address. For example, there is a chance in that group which is at the moment a bit forgotten.
Nina, did you want to add any comments?
Feel like I'm keeping you from lunch now, and that's never a very good thing. But I think the Norwegian experience is similar to the Florence experience in the sense that what they did was they did hire these multilingual assistants and teachers, and I think that is one place to start. But it's not so straightforward how to be able to reach out to families always. So I think this is something that needs more work, really.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of our speakers, and thank you for bearing with me with my draconic timekeeping here.
Thank you.
I think this was very stimulating. I really think it gives us a lot of thought, thinking about how to target vulnerable groups, this sort of balance between maximizing the impact that we can have in these areas and sort of the more broader perspective. And I just want to say thank you again, both of you, for making this possible to speak to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your questions. And yeah, I encourage you to carry any thoughts, any conversation you may have over into our lunch break, which will be happening just outside. But before we do that, please thank both of our speakers with me.